Good morning and welcome to the Museum Program webinar for applications, the webinar for 2019 for museums with operating budgets under 1 million. Applications that will be due by March 28 at 4 p.m. are for activities occurring in calendar year 2019. For everyone on this webinar, please note all of you are muted. Only Fabiana and I will be speaking. We encourage you to use the chat function, which for me is at the top of the page. If you have questions, use the chat function. We will refer to those questions towards the end of this webinar. We will not identify you or your organization, so please feel free to ask whatever you want. It will be anonymous. And this application deadline of 4 p.m. on March 28th, I want to stress, as I will probably do multiple times in this webinar, please do not wait. Please do not wait to March 28th to submit your application. The Grants Gateway takes longer than you might expect. Things can happen. We do not want your organization to be in a situation where you're calling me a few minutes before 4 asking for an extension, because I do not have that power. No one here does. The system shuts down at 4 o'clock their time, so don't risk that your clock is a minute faster or slower than them. Please do your best to get your application in well before the 28th for your own sanity and peace of mind.
Oh, this year we're particularly excited about the fact that we have changed and rearranged some of the questions from previous years, and we've done that specifically hoping that we can help the organizations that are smaller, $1 million or less, hoping that these changes can better serve those organizations. I want to go back a little bit to the deadline situation with Kristen. One of the things that we found out was that some organizations were waiting till the last day to hit submit. Even though they were done with the application, they waited till the last day to hit submit, and then they encountered problems and could not submit. So if you're ready to submit, go ahead and submit it a couple of days before, so that in case you encounter any problems, we have time to get back to you. We will not have time to get back to everybody that reaches out to us on the very last day at the very last hour. But going back to our friendly faces, I'm Fabiana Rinaldi. I'm a program officer here at the New York State Council on the Arts. I work with the Electronic Media and Film program and the Museums program. And next to me is...
I'm Kristen Herron. I'm program director for architecture, design, and museums. So what will this webinar cover? We have 5 bullet points that are key points here. We're going to give you an overview of the museum program. We're going to give you some information on how NYSCA decides who gets funded. We want to go over the application questions, which Fabiana has said we've recast a little bit this year. We want to go over what documents are required as supporting materials, and some quick helpful tips on how to best make your case, at which point we will then review your questions for answers, to provide those answers. We want you to know what this webinar will not include, so we will not explain how to be pre-qualified with New York State through the Grants Gateway. That is a requirement of all applicants. That is not something we will discuss here. We're not going to discuss the technical process of registering on the arts.ny.gov website, nor will we discuss the specific steps through which you enter the Grants Gateway to submit your application. Those key points do have very useful videos available on our new website at arts.ny.gov, so we encourage you to use those resources as well as a downloadable PDF that walks you through those steps. That will help you much more than we could verbally right now.
So, the New York State Council on the Arts. Some of you may know We were established in 1960, and the museum program is one of the oldest programs established here at NYSCA since 1966. There are 15 programs here at NYSCA. You can see them on your screen. There is an additional initiative that would be the Regional Economic Development Initiative. Last year, we we were able to give out $41 million in funding. We expect that number to be very similar this year.
So I mentioned the arts.ny.gov website. As perhaps many, if not all of you already noticed, our website has been upgraded from its 2003 edition. It's much more vibrant, has some video on the home page. But these are some screenshots of what you need for this application. So if you go to arts.ny.gov, the left image shows you what will pop up when you go down on the, you choose programs from the queue and then you select museum. There's also just the direct hot link on top that you can use. And this just gives you a visual of our program page, the program overview, and when you go to museum and click view, you'll go deeper inside, which will take you to an overview page with our photos, and when you scroll down to the bottom, towards the bottom, there will be a hot link to the guidelines PDF. As I always warn folks, when you open up that PDF, it is quite large and it's very daunting. What I want to stress to you is that about the first, say, 80% of that document are instructions on how to do all the things we're not telling you about here. The steps to use the Grants Gateway, for example. There are lots of great screenshots that give you an example of what you may be coming across. That section is generic to every program, so there will be screenshots that are examples from other programs. There's a screenshot with an example of supporting documents. That's just to show you what it looks like to enter it, but does not reflect our supporting documents, for example. But that first section is really helpful, a helpful tool when you're doing the nitty-gritty of entering the information. But you're going to go much further down in that document to get to our requirements and our questions, which we'll be going over shortly.
The museum program. How do we define museums? And also for the purposes of NYSCA. Museums allow us to experience great art, to discover stories about objects, and to explore worlds both new and familiar. Does this sound like you? Great! So definitely you belong here. Within museums, arts and cultural activities may be very diverse, but in their heart there's an emphasis on the exhibition and interpretation of art, objects, or a historic space. We have a little bit of a further definition even of museums, so we stress the importance of caring for interpreting objects, art, or structures. So there are certainly some museums that do not have permanent collections, but in those cases, if their reason for being is to interpret art, objects, or spaces, then this is an appropriate spot for them. We note that museums should follow accepted professional standards, such as those developed by the American Alliance of Museums. And in New York State, most museums must be chartered through New York State's chartering program. That is through the New York State Education Department. Not all museums are chartered, in part because some of them came into existence before that system did. So if you are listening to this call and you think, I'm not sure if I'm chartered or I'm not sure if I'm eligible because I know that my institution is not chartered, you can follow up with one of us later. We have the current chartering list, and we can talk to you about whether your institution is appropriate for the museum program, because again, not all museums are chartered because of some of the rules of when that system came to be. But we also want all of you listening to know that when we use the term museum, we include historic houses in this. We include historic sites. If you're a historical society on this call with a museum, we're calling you a museum. It's just to simplify our conversation here instead of a long caveat of what this might include. But we do not generally include institutions that primarily manage living collections. That would be the institutions
that would most likely apply to New York State's ZBGA programs. So zoos, botanical gardens, aquariums. We will entertain applications in our project support category from these entities if it's about non-living art or objects. So if you're on this call and you're wondering if it's appropriate, again, you can follow up with us later. We have funded, for example, some botanical gardens that have offered exhibitions of art that is integrated within their mission and their living collections, but our focus is not on the living collections. You should definitely, again, go to New York State's Zoos, Botanical Gardens, and Aquariums program for support if you are an institution with living collections. We also don't support archival or library collections, projects focused on those elements of a museum, and that's because we have sister agencies that do that. New York State's Documentary Heritage Program, or the Program for the Conservation and Preservation of Library Research Materials, are those resources. So if you are thinking about a project that deals with documents, archives, or library collections, you should instead look at the guidelines and the opportunities that those New York State agencies offer. Through the application that's due on March 28th, we also do not fund conservation treatment. That's because the museum program has a partnership to offer conservation treatment funding, which is administered on our behalf by the Greater Hudson Heritage Network. That deadline is June 1st this year. You can go to greaterhudson.org to get the information on it. An organization may apply if they are eligible to conservation treatment and directly to NYSCA for a project. That's part of why we have it administered outside of our agency, so that you can take advantage of both opportunities if relevant. And finally, in the what we don't fund category, the museum program does not fund things like collections shelving or storage systems or gallery lighting either. As important as all of that is covered by NYSCA's facilities program in the capital equipment category. So you can look at those guidelines to see if you're eligible if you have such needs coming up.
Hey, Christy, I have a question for you. You might have mentioned this earlier, but this is such a great PowerPoint presentation. Is there a place where people can get it afterwards?
That's a great question, Fabiana. So I'm hoping all of you on the call noticed that when you clicked the hot link to log into this webinar, not only did you see our smiling faces, but there is a downloadable version of exactly this PowerPoint in that front page. So if you didn't download it already, what I suggest is when we're done, click the hot link again and you should be able to download it. Any trouble, let me know and I can send it directly to you.
That's so amazing. You thought of everything.
Oh, I don't know. We'll see.
All right. So how long or how often do we have to be open to be eligible? Well, if you have to ask the question. Anyway, so there is a minimum requirement. The minimum requirement is 1 year prior to the application deadline. There are other minimum requirements, such as 120 days per year by the deadline. It is a competitive process. It is public funds. So obviously, the more you can show that you serve the public, the better your odds of getting the funding. If you're just above this threshold, you may not fare as well as some of the other applications that offer open hours more often, and where people can access you. It's really more about public accessibility. They shouldn't have to come to you by appointment only or through similar methodologies. But the idea is the more you offer to the public on a regular basis, the better your application will fare.
So we're going to get to the question of the two categories that this program offers.
Just two?
Just two that are open
How
to
could it be any
from.
simpler?
I guess one, but we're going to stick with two for now. Applicants may choose one application to the museum program in either the general operating support or the project support category. You may realize, and if you don't, you do now, that organization may submit two requests to NYSCA. but those 2 requests may not be within the museum program. There can be 1 to the museum program and 1 to another program here at the council. So general operating support is certainly something I think that people covet because it's hard to come by. But so that as you gauge where you want to go, GOS is the category where we, the program staff and our peer review panel, are doing a full review of the museum's operations. We're looking at NYSCA's 3 primary criteria: artistic, programmatic, managerial, fiscal, and service to the public. And we're looking for an application that makes the case that they're strong in all 3 areas. To be competitive in GOS, you should have a clear mission. You should have ongoing programs and exhibitions that support that mission and interpret art and objects. You should be caring for your collections to the best of your abilities. You should be financially stable. You are required to have at least 1 salaried, full, or part-time staff member. So if you are an all-volunteer organization, GOS is not an option for you. And obviously your board should be engaged, and we, as an arts council, stress that fair pay of artists and consultants is critical. Project support is the other side of this. Again, you may choose one or the other. Project support request focuses on a specific arts or cultural project, which furthers the museum or museum service organization and its ability to better reach its audience. So this can be many different things. It could be an exhibition, could be a museum education program, might be collections research, could be audience development. If you have other ideas, you can definitely throw them out at us, and we will talk to you about whether they're eligible or not. I stress the arts cultural angle because although any type of museum may apply to the New York State Council on the Arts, we are an arts council, so if you are a museum that is science-focused, an application for a STEM program, science, technology, engineering, math, is not going to fare well if you have left out the A, the arts. So STEAM can meet our mission, but STEM does not. So if you're a science-based museum, think about what you choose to submit to the Arts Council, that it meets an arts cultural framework.
And if I can go further with that example, which is a really good example. Yes, talk about STEAM, but tell us what you're doing for the arts or culture part, because that's the only part that we can fund of it. There's been examples in the past where they tell us that the program is STEAM, but then they don't give us any information as to what percentage of the program is going to be dealing with cultural arts, which is the percentage that we can fund. So anyway, how much are the grant awards? This is such a key question, and we wish more applicants would ask it before they decide how much to ask for. And actually, this is a really good question to ask any funder that you deal with. What is the range? So we keep some pretty good records here at NYSCA and statistics, and we've discovered that for organizations that are $1 million or under in their general operating budget, that I'm sorry?
And projects.
And projects. That the grant awards range from $5,000 to $20,000. So generally from $5,000 to $20,000. If you don't know what to make your ask for, give us a call and we can find out more about your budget. We can find out more about your project and tell you what similar projects have actually have been able to be granted for the dollar amounts. Now, general operating support is generally awarded for on a multi-year basis, and so that's for more than 1 year. You do not make that determination. There is no button in the entire application where you check, I want multi-year. That is up to us here at NYSCA. Depending on how the review goes and how well you fare, the number of years that you get out of that one application will be determined by us here. So no button for you to check. GOS assumes that you want it for multi-year. Project support, on the other hand, is usually awarded on a single year basis. And here's the most important note about this particular slide. The fact that you've gotten funding, if you've gotten funding from the council before, does not guarantee any support in future years, doesn't even guarantee the dollar amount that you've gotten in the past. And one example that I have for that is that recently for the other program where I work, an applicant had gotten a significant lower amount of money than the previous year. And she was very upset about it, obviously, and she gave me a call and she wanted to know what went wrong, and I said, nothing went wrong. You just got the top award in that category for the amount of money that we have in this year. And so she felt much better. Obviously, the dollar amount was not commensurate to what she had received before, but she certainly, she most certainly got the top award, and then things got sorted out from that point on.
And that example has absolutely happened in the museum program as well. Not always with a happy ending there. So I can't stress this enough. I'm going to largely repeat the concepts Fabiana presented, because this is really, I think, hard for people to understand, especially if you've been applying to NYSCA for many, many years. This was not always true, but your application is going to be reviewed, and we're going to talk about that coming up. How it's reviewed is whether or not you're going to get funded, and not every applicant will get funded. We have 2 to 3 times the amount of requests that we have money, for which we have money. The program has over $3 million to award, but that does not go far with all of the museums in New York State. So there are definitely the difficult calls that we have with organizations that are not funded. I think it's safe to say that we never like making those calls. We always want to see people being successful, but the reality is it's not going to happen. I firmly believe that it is wrong to give every application a tiny amount of money, because we set you all up to fail. So the point of this process is that there is an evaluation and that not everyone will get funded. So bear that in mind, and as hard as that is to hear, congratulations, you've been funded, it's less than last year, again, it doesn't necessarily mean you've done anything wrong. It's about who's applied, how many have applied, how many strong applications there are, and how much money we have to give out.
So you spoke about how things are evaluated. Should I talk about that?
I think it's a great idea, Fabiana.
All right, let's talk about our process for evaluating proposals. It is, depending on who you talk to, either a 4-step process or a 5-step process. It takes us pretty much all year to go through all applications. The first step being staff, us, Kristen and I, going over your proposal to make sure that it is eligible to apply to us. We do review it for completion. Obviously, after the deadline, we cannot get back to you and say this is done or that's not done, or we need this or that more information. But we are reviewing all the applications to make sure that we know what it is that we're going to be forwarding to our peer review panels. The peer review panels are a time-honored process that we have here at NYSCA, where 7 colleagues of yours will gather live here at our offices in New York City, and they will go over your proposals, everything that you have submitted. They will provide us with a numerical score based on 3 different criteria. One is the artistic programmatic quality of your project, your proposal. The second one is managerial fiscal competence, and the third one being service to the public. And each application is rated on a scale of 1 to 9 for each of the criteria, and then there is an aggregate score that helps us determine whether the organization and the project is funded and how much they'll get funded. Obviously, the higher the score, the higher the percentage of funding for that particular project. After the panels have met, the recommendations are forwarded to a subcommittee of our board, also known as the council, and then those recommendations are then forwarded to the full council or our board. And sometimes our applicants will call us halfway through the process, and they want to know how they fared, and unfortunately we cannot tell them, because at any given one of these steps, the council or the committee can issue a different recommendation. So nothing is final until that very last council meeting, and only after that council meeting, which usually happens towards the end of the calendar year, will you know and will you be notified whether funding has been made available to you. So unfortunately, we have to go through all of that. And see, this 4-step process, we follow that for every single application that arrives here at NYSCA. And so if we get 1,200 applications or more, that's exactly what's going to happen to every single one of them. And the reason is these are public funds. There's checks and balances, and we want to make sure that we make those awards based on really sound decisions for the use of public funds, your own taxpayers' funds.
So here's something new for all of you listening into this webinar. For fiscal year 2019, all applications from museums with operating budgets of $1 million or less will be reviewed at one panel meeting, whether you're GOS or project support, and we will only have panelists who either are currently working at museums with operating budgets under $1 million or who have in the very recent past. We are doing this as a test to really give smaller museums, we think, that greater chance of being successful by having their immediate peers reviewing them. It's definitely come as suggestions from the field. So that's one of the new things that you're going to see this year. Or you won't necessarily see it in person, but will be happening behind the scenes.
Hey, can I have a question?
Yeah.
When you say peers, what do you mean? I mean, where are these individuals being pulled from? What type of museums do they represent?
So panelists represent all types of museums across the state. They can be nominated, they can be self-nominated, they can be nominated by someone in the field. The deadline was last Friday. They can be nominated by either of us. And again, they represent all types of museums all across New York State, large, medium, small, curators, directors, educators, development folks. We sometimes involve faculty at museum studies programs. So they can be a really diverse background, and we have made sure that our pool includes folks from museums of very different sizes, and that we absolutely have enough to have 7 in the room who have the experience at smaller museums this year.
Exactly. So we'll see how it goes. I hope it works out for the better for everybody. So let's
application questions. Should we start with?
Yeah, I bet they're waiting for that.
So we're going to start with project support.
Yeah. So all the questions have been rewritten, and hoping that you will be able to put your best foot forward. And it's interesting because sometimes applicants answer the questions, and they don't understand sometimes when they don't get funded. They say, "But I answer all the questions." Mm-hmm. It's not just answering all the questions; it's answering all the questions in a compelling way, in a way that is going to convince the panel to fund them. So answering the questions is the minimum you can do. The best you can do is tell us more about the projects and being more compelling about it. And so the questions, if you see them, when you'll see them very soon, have been designed so that you can, in fact, tell us the best picture possible for your project. Can they use all the space available, Kristen, that is made available to them online?
They can, but I just want to say something that I'm now going to forget. With the character count for each question is 4,000 characters. It's something that is hardwired into Gateway. We can't adapt them for each question, so 4,000 is the amount of characters.
That's a lot, isn't it?
It is a lot. So what we want all of you to think very carefully about is when you choose to go up to 4,000 characters and when you do not. Because I guarantee you, you do not need to use all 4,000 characters for every question you're being asked. Some questions you may very well want to provide more context for that. But some of the questions really don't require an extensive answer. So you should not feel that you have to just fill the space. And by all means, please do not cut and paste the same answer for multiple questions or because you feel like you have to fill the space. I definitely saw that a lot more last year, and that was a great challenge in reading the applications. Why? Because honestly, my eyes start glazing over when I realize I'm reading the same words over and over again. We've tried our best to make sure the questions aren't written in a way that make you think we're asking you the same thing repeatedly, because we really, really aren't. But I definitely saw last year in the requests that I read, that some applicants seem to be cutting and pasting answers just to fill up those 4,000 characters. So again, do not use the full character space unless you really have something to say. It's really not required at all.
I think the only exception to that is coming up actually in the next slide. Question 1 in the artistic programmatic, what is your project and why is it important? That will give you a pass. You can use the 4,000 characters if you need to, because that's the one where you're basically going to tell us what you're doing. And so that you can definitely use all the space that is available. The next questions, not so much. Collections, obviously, how you're using your collection as part of this project, if you have a collection. And the third question, project staff. I love this one because this time we are going to save you a lot of time. We are not asking for resumes to be submitted as a support material. We're just asking you to send us, in this proposal, just brief paragraphs, biographical paragraphs about each one of the important staff that will be working on the project. So saving you quite a bit of space and time there as well.
But I would say think very carefully about what your biographical statement says, because this is all we're now going to see about your project staff. So people have very different backgrounds, but that paragraph should be focused on why that person is the right person for what they're doing. So sometimes, you know, people working in the field a long time, if you're going to distill your history down to a few sentences, you want it to be enough the panel understands why. How is that person relevant to this project? Ask yourself that question.
Right, how is that person going to really help this project? So if this bio has nothing to do with the project, then guess what's going to happen?
And this question might be one where you end up using the full character count, depending on how many key project staff you have. That's going to really, really vary. I'm going to add just to 1P maybe to say, we say, what is your project and why is it important? That's pretty open-ended, but you should try to think through all the key things that we need to know. So in the past, as an example, if you are applying for an exhibition, I have seen requests where the applicant forgets to tell us when the exhibition opens. That is pretty important part of your project. So even though we haven't delineated every little tiny thing, question 1P really needs us to get that full picture of your project and its information. So make sure.
Hey, here's a little tip though. For that first question, 1P going back, if you're able to very briefly, even in the opening statement, say the who, what, when, where, how, just in the opening, so that you can give us almost like a summary, you know, who's doing this project, what it is about, well, who is your organization, what it is about, when is it happening, that would be good.
That would be fantastic if it was like the executive summary in the first couple sentences and then details.
The idea of an executive summary.
Yeah, we can't ask for a separate executive summary, really. Right. But so think of it that way. Just, you know, hit in the first couple sentences.
For question 1, and then you go into details in the other questions.
Well,
I love that. Yeah.
First sentences.
Yeah.
Still use that space.
Yeah.
But like head us up so the first thing the panel reads, the first thing we read, we know the exhibition is called this, it's about this, it's happening on these dates. Like just the first 2 sentences should be your summary. Absolutely. I see there's a question. We're definitely going to get to your questions. Just bear with us as we get through the rest of the webinar. So managerial fiscal for projects. 3 questions here. We want to know how this project is critical to meeting your mission and your strategic goals. We want you to understand that the activities that we could potentially fund must only occur in calendar year 2019. So if your project spans more than 1 year, you can explain that to us briefly, but what we're interested in is what happens in 2019 in terms of who's doing what, when, and in terms of your finances. So we can only fund up to half of a project's total cost, which, as you already heard from Fabiana, the ranges have been about $5,000 to $20,000, so it may not even be 50% that we can afford, but we definitely can't support more than that. We want to know what your other means of support are, whether they're confirmed or pending, and we want you to make sure that the budget you're talking about here is about what's getting expended in 2019. So again, if your project goes over a couple years, we need you to focus on, in 2019, it's going to cost us this much, and this is what we're asking for support for. This is also a really important spot that while we are not looking at your organization as a whole per se in project support, if your organization is experiencing ongoing deficits or surpluses, the panel will see that. And particularly if it's ongoing deficits, that's going to be a potential concern about your capacity to take on another project. So this is an opportunity for you to explain to us the situation at your museum.
And the third category is service to the public. It's the third and the last category, so we're almost done with the project questions. There are 4 questions in this category. We ask about who you're hoping to serve. We're asked about, under marketing, we ask how you hope to reach them. Under evaluation, we ask about how you will know you were successful in meeting your goals. And lastly, we ask about who else in your community offers similar cultural activities and how what you're doing is different or helps complement what others are offering. This is a very useful question to us because it helps us understand that you know what else is around, that you're not duplicating efforts, and that you're really adding to your community with your services and what you're planning to do, and that you're aware of what everybody else is doing and you work collaborative with them. Going back to the marketing question, that's one of our reworked questions. It asks, what are some of the creative methods that you will use to reach the intended audience? And creative methods. So we don't necessarily want to know what you always do. We want to know what you will do to fit this particular project specifically, how you're using this opportunity to reach perhaps a new audience, and how you're going to be using perhaps some unusual methods to make sure that you reach out to them. And some of the better methods don't cost anything, we found out.
And I think related to that, this is a good opportunity to say that if your answer to that question is a list, that's not a strong answer. So an answer that is, we'll post on Facebook, post on Instagram, and we'll use Twitter, full stop. A list.
That's an answer.
It's an answer. But you might want to give us a little more than just a list. And you know, I was thinking back to before when I said there was something I forgot to say about the answers. So I will on occasion have to share with the people that Fabiana talked about the importance of the answers. I will sometimes read applications where there's absolutely an answer, but the answer is not to the question we asked.
Get out. Really? That happens?
It happens all the time, and it is baffling to me, I have to say.
Right.
So we're going to mention this again later, but please do remember when you read the question to be sure that your answer addresses that question. I'll give an example coming up in GOS of where I saw that a lot last time. That was last year. That to me was very problematic.
You know how to get around that a little bit, or maybe help with that, is maybe ask a friend who's not familiar with your project to read it, or ask a colleague to read it, somebody who's not familiar with the project.
And make sure they know the question you're answering too.
Absolutely.
See both parts and have them give you critical feedback. That's a really valuable thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to go over GOS as well. Again, we have rewritten all of these questions. Our intent is to give you that opportunity to put your best foot forward, and we hope that we have rewritten them in a way that doesn't make you think we are asking you the same thing over and over again. So, artistic programmatic is the first section for the GOS, just as it is for project support. We start by asking your background of your museum, when were you established your collections, and this is where you're going to put the URL for your website. You can add your social media accounts. I know it doesn't say that, but you can do that. This is critical because this is the visual presence that the panel will be seeing from your museum. We are only going to your website now as your visual supporting information, so that's important. If your website is in progress of being revamped, like ours just was, you should mention that. say, we're working on it, we anticipate a new website up at this point, or we know we need to improve our website, but it's not in our budget yet. If you think, oh no, my website doesn't look that great, it's not designed as well as I'd like it to be, but you need to let us know that you know that and how you plan to address that or not, because it's where we're going to look. The artistic cultural vision, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but this is one of those places where you should absolutely not use the 4,000 characters. Can't stress enough, this question should never use the full 4,000 characters. And hold that thought, I'll come back to it in a minute. The program overview, so for anyone who's read our application or read our questions the past couple of years, this is a big change. Instead of asking you to predict for us what you will be doing for the next 2 or 3 years, we're asking you to put your institution in the strongest light by giving us some detailed information on recent examples, really probably the past year, of a program, an exhibition, something you've done that really reflects who you are as a museum that you're proud of. We want to know how they connect to your collections, and then give us some examples of what you're planning for the upcoming years. So we're not asking for that list of everything you're doing for the next couple years. We're asking you to sort of curate your answer to tell us, here's some really great examples of who we are, what we've done, and where we're headed. And that's how we're going to evaluate your programs. We want to know about your current collecting priorities and how they collect to your collections policy. If your institution is a non-collecting institution, you can state that here, but then you can describe how you do use objects or art in your programs, whether they're from traveling exhibitions or other means. And we want to know how you evaluate your programs, whether it's formal or informal, and give us a specific example of how an evaluation technique has led to programmatic change. Again, whether that's formal or informal, whether it's in-depth or not, give us a specific example of how you use that to make yourself even better. And here's where I want to highlight one of the questions that we found to be problematic last year, and it's the artistic cultural vision. So what I found last year in more applications than made me happy is that people didn't answer this question. They instead used the entire 4,000 characters to tell me everything their museum does. It became a list of programs, exhibitions, and that's not what we're asking for at all. We're not asking for your mission statement here. That does appear in your organizational profile on NYSCA. We're asking for your aspirational vision statement. Some museums have codified, approved vision statements from their board. If that's your case, that's what you're going to put here. If your institution has not done that, then think deeply about a brief statement that talks about what your institution aspires to be in the future and what you hope to achieve in relation to serving your communities. And remember, it's artistic cultural vision because we are an arts council. So if you are an institution that says, I don't have an artistic cultural vision, that's not who I am, then that tells you right then and there GOS is the wrong spot for you. If you can't answer this question, then you will not fare well in this category. I tell people all the time, I can answer this question for any museum of any type in the state. I guarantee it. I could come up with your cultural vision. I can't do that for you, though. Right. So you need to dig deep to see how your work meshes with us.
But if you don't see yourself that way, could that possibly mean that it's a wrong fit for the Arts Council?
It means you are absolutely, Fabiana, if you don't see yourself that way, you are either a completely wrong fit for the Arts Council, or you are definitely a wrong fit for general operating support, and perhaps you have one activity that really does meet the council, and then project support becomes your better spot.
Right.
Yes, good point.
Okay, so managerial and fiscal, it's the second criteria that we use in the general operating support category. We have a number of questions. Obviously, we want to know about your staff. Again, paragraphs, not a full resume as a support material, so just a paragraph. Changes and challenges, I want to go back to that in a minute. Governance, how does your board reflect your museum's community? How does the board provide fiscal and management oversight? I have a little tip about this particular one, the governance one. If there are any members of your board who also are paid as staff members. Talk to us, call us. That's a conflict of interest. That your organizational information should not, and your organization should not have a board member that is also paid as a staff member or vice versa. So definitely talk to us.
You know, another quick tip here, now that I'm
Yeah.
thinking about it, we don't talk about the vendor responsibility process. It's a form you have to fill out where another member of our staff,
That's
a
not for
team,
NYSCA. Who does
evaluates that. NYSCA evaluates the vendor rep evaluation.
It's a comptroller's issue.
Requirement, but it is evaluated in-house here. One of the things they're going to look at on your website is that your board members are all listed on your website, and that your executive board members are identified. It's a transparency issue, so if anyone out there does not have their board listed on their website and their executive board identified, get that done before you apply, because it's one less thing you're going to get asked about later on.
You definitely don't want any red flags to be raised about your application. We don't want you to have any red flags raised in your application, so that's a really, really good tip. Organizational development, facilities, finances. Okay, let me stop there for a sec. If you are showing, if the budgets that you're going to be submitting, and Kristen is going to show you what those budgets are in a minute, if those budgets show that you have a surplus or a deficit, please use this question to explain and tell us why, how you're meeting those deficits. What are your plans for retiring those deficits? If you have a surplus, explain why you are applying for public funds despite the fact that you have extra money. So tell us more about that. Don't leave us to wonder about it. I want to go back to the question about changes and challenges. Because that is one where some of our applicants have tripped a little bit before. I hear, allegedly, that some of our applicants have actually answered with a not applicable.
That is correct.
Could that be possible? We believe that every organization, no matter what side, encounters both challenges and has opportunities to meet those challenges. So we want you to be candid about what those challenges are, and you know, you're talking to your colleagues here, people who are well aware of what it is like to run a museum. So tell us what those challenges are, so that we can help you, and also tell us what those challenges are and what you're doing to solve those problems. So that's key.
That's key.
Awareness is important, and then some troubleshooting and problem solving is also important. Make all of that transparent for us, and you'll do better.
Absolutely. So the last section, service to the public. We ask, and this is where we've really tried to make sure these questions don't overlap. So if you think they do, we apologize. We've tried. We want to know who your current and potential audiences are. For constituency. We then want to know about your visitation. We want to know how it's been trending on site for the past 2 years, and the efforts you make to continue to cultivate and expand your audience. What's really important, I think, about this one too is that if you have trends that are going in the direction you don't want them to be, you should talk to us about that. So I'll discuss that again in just a minute. Marketing, we want to know how you promote yourself. Talk about your creative marketing opportunities here. This is another space we encourage that. And the community context question, we want to know what other organizations exist that provide similar activities, and how do you work in partnership with them or not. And this is really important to make sure that you understand the ecosystem in which you exist. So if you are a specialized type of museum, you might want to talk about the other types of museums that are similar to you across the state. If you are more local, it might be more focused on what other arts organizations exist within your community or your county. And I want to focus on number 14, development and outreach. So I think this is one that people have challenges with because they're really concerned about that quantitative number of audience. So not every museum, of course, exists in a large urban center. We understand that. But what not everyone knows when they read an application is that direct context. Fabiana, I think you once read an application where this question said something to the effect of, we live in a county where there are more bears than people. Am I getting the animal wrong?
I think it was either bears or horses.
But it was really a telling moment, particularly for people in urban centers, to understand this regionality. So the context you provide is very important. There's an institution that talks about their geographical size, which is larger than some states, or at least one state in the country. They talk about how in the winter sometimes roads are impassable, so while there's a certain population in their county, that population can't always get to their museum. And then they talk about the specific urban centers and what those populations are. So the context is really important to give us an understanding of whatever your audience numbers are, because it may seem modest if you're in a mix of a range of institutions. But in the context of your community, it actually might be very substantive. There was a museum that had just a few thousand, like maybe 3,000 visitors, but when they gave us the context of their locality, it was like 60% of the people who could have come. It was actually a really great number, but on the surface it might not seem like that. So let us know if there are barriers to participation, how you reach people. Do your museum hours affect your participation? And what I was alluding to before is when we ask you for your visitation numbers for the past couple of years, if they're going up, tell us why you think that's the case. If they're going down, tell us why you think that's the case. Maybe you had an anniversary event, and so you had a really an increase in participation in one year, but that was not what you would typically expect. So don't just show us you're going up or down. Tell us why you think that's the case. And if your numbers are level, you want to address that too. So when we say give us your trends, don't just leave it at the numbers. Give us the context. Always so important. We're nearing the end of our lengthy conversation to you. We want to talk about the supporting materials. So the first one I'm going to handle, which are the budget numbers. So there's a little screenshot here of the NYSCA project budget form that everybody has to fill out. GOS applicants are filling this out with their projected 2019 operating budget. Project support folks are focusing on the numbers for the project that occurs in 2019. You're going to download this from the Grants Gateway in what's called the pre-submission upload section. You're going to fill it in. Make sure you save it on your computer. I'll say that again. Make sure you save it. Because if you fill it in and then immediately upload it, it's going to upload blank, and you don't want that. Save it and then upload it back in. Again, if this this should not show a surplus at all, because that suggests you don't need NYSCA funds. Please make sure you use the budget notes space to explain any of the lines or anything that seems unusual. We're also asking you to take the organizational budget that you are required to submit on arts.ny.gov. This is what it looks like on your right. When you fill that in after your registration on NYSCA is done, go back, open the budget up, right-click it, save it as a PDF, and then you're going to upload it into the Grants Gateway. This has been something our panelists always look at, but they don't have direct access to it anymore, so we're asking you to put it in the Gateway so that they do have that direct access. And now, project support
materials. Yes. So we're asking you to upload, also in the pre-submission uploads, 15 images that best illustrate your project. And so if it's for an exhibition, it must be of images of art or artifacts that will be included in the exhibition, or examples of previous exhibitions or the designer's work. Some of the applicants prefer to upload a PowerPoint here, and that's acceptable. Now, under number 2, we have an example of the types of support materials that you could upload in the pre-submission uploads, depending on what it is that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a public program series, then upload some marketing material samples that you have used for programs like these before.
Sometimes folks ask us if they should send testimonials about their projects. So in general, we do not accept any supporting documents. If you ask your local politicians to say, we support this project, that is not part of our process. The only time that might be relevant is if you, say, are doing a service to the field and you're working with specific museums on a project. In that case, we'd want to know that the museums actually want to work with you. So if you have questions about that, let us know. But just testimonials saying, hey, this place is great, please support them, that is non-evaluative material. That is not something you should upload.
You will notice that we were talking about project support materials, and that's all we'll talk about in terms of support materials, because GOS applicants don't need any additional support documents other than those 2 budgets that you mentioned earlier. And so we hope to save you a lot of time with that.
And why is that?
I don't know why.
Oh, because everything we used to ask you for supporting documents, we embedded in the narrative. So we're trying to save you time and our time. It's already there for you.
We're going to be looking at your website, and obviously we're interested in knowing how you communicate with the public. That's why you're applying for public funds. And it should all be well reflected in your website, and it's sufficient for us to look at your website.
All right, a couple tips on making your case. I think some of them we may have already said. So you please answer the question that we actually asked. If you're not sure what our question is, follow up with us. Make sure that your narrative, your image, and your budgets all tell the same story. What do I mean? If your narrative talks about your exhibition, but your budget is for your public programs, those don't tell the same story. Please make sure they're all telling us the same thing. Proofread for errors. We're human. A typo here or there is not a problem. But applications riddled with typos, or applications where you put a note in, have Fabiana upload, and you forgot to actually upload the text, that doesn't look good. So, and then you also haven't answered the question. So please proofread for errors. And from my literary background, show, don't tell. We don't want to hear superlatives. We don't want to see an application that says, we're the first, we're the best, we're the greatest, because it doesn't tell us anything. It really doesn't. You need to show us how great you are or how unique you are, not just making a statement and expecting us all to accept that. Give us the content that shares that.
So in order to apply to NYSCA this year, as in previous years, you'll be actually working in 2 different platforms, online platforms. You will need to register your application in arts.ny.gov. That's where you give us some very brief information about what you're hoping to apply for, how much you're asking for. And then you will be given a special key at the end of that registration process so that you can start your process in the grants gateway and answer all the questions that we just went through. So hopefully a majority of you have already done that, but it's really a 2-platform situation. If you do one and not the other, you are automatically disqualified. The platforms will be open for business as of February 21st, 2018. That's when you can begin to both register and submit your answers in the Grants Gateway. Obviously, do it in that order. First register, then Grants Gateway. So February 1st. And
21st.
I'm sorry, 21st. Thanks for catching that.
Oh my God.
Yes. So, and the applications and registrations must be received no later than 4 o'clock on March 28th, 2018. Just to remind you, don't wait till that last day to hit submit. If you're ready to hit submit earlier, do yourself a favor, hit it sooner than later, just in case you encounter any problems. That way we can help you. There's another thing about the February 21st deadline. We can talk to you and answer questions prior to February 21st and answer questions that are qualitative about your request, like which one's better, which one do you think will fare better. Of course, we can't guarantee funding, but we can tell you based on history what has fared well and what hasn't up to February 21st. After that, we can only answer technical questions about the application, like where do I hit, where do I find, etc. We're ready for you now.
We are ready for you now. So I'm just going to go up to the top here. You can see my cursor move, and I'm going to find the chat box, which I think none of you will see. I'm going to take a look at some of the questions that have come in. You can continue to enter questions through the chat box. I know we've already kept you an hour. I'm sorry for that, but we really had a lot of information we wanted to make sure you knew. So, all right, so this is a great question, and I almost now feel like I should have started with this. So this organization says that they received a 2-year GOS award for FY18 and 19, and they understand they have to register on NYSCA, but do they have to reapply through the Grants Gateway? No, you do. This organization does not have to reapply through the Grants Gateway. So if your museum is on a multi-year contract that continues in 2019, you should know that from your contract. You do need to go to arts.ny.gov as of February 21st to what we call register. It's updating your information, it's confirming that you're still around and you're still doing what you said you do. And when you do that, you will be done. Obviously, final reports are always due. So most of you will have final reports due at the end of this month if you were funded in the past. But you do not have to go back into Grants Gateway if you are currently on multi-year. That is an important question. And I'm actually surprised that is currently our only question, so we really want to encourage any of you to pose questions to us.
But why should you be so surprised when you've been so
so thorough? We'll give you a minute to capture your thoughts. Otherwise, if there aren't any other questions, maybe we have been so thorough, or maybe you're going to leave this webinar and think, oh no, I do have a question, or I have a question that's really unique to my institution. So here's how you can reach us. You can reach us by email or phone, and what I encourage is you start with email and you choose one of us. Please do not email both of us, because that means we're both going to get back to you. It means you're going to have, it's going to be more time on everybody's hands. So choose one of us. Start with our email to schedule a time to talk to us on the phone or to pose your questions by email. Please do not be offended if you emailed one of us but the other one responds. We keep in touch, and if one of us happens to get more questions than the other, and we're thus going to take longer to get back to you, we help each other out and take those questions. So there should be no offense depending on who gets back to you. We're just trying to get back to you as quickly as we can. I do see another question, and maybe I should answer it because of my past.
Sure.
So the question that just came in, I'm not entirely sure I fully understand it, person who just submitted it. So you may want to type in some clarifications. I'm going to read it as I see it. It's about the facilities program. And they want, and can that be funded, can a jump space, that's what I don't know what that means, a jump space that's needed for museum renovation be funded in GOS or facilities? Is that the question? So the person who posed this, I'm not clear on what a jump space is. What I can say is no capital work can be supported with museum GOS. We say it's unrestricted to a certain amount of money. It is, except it cannot be used for capital funds. That's because NYSCA can only provide capital funding based on very, very strict rules from legislation that dates back to 1987. I know this because I used to run that program. Oh, thank you, this person. So jump space. Oh, so I guess, like, I'm guessing you're saying sort of to pay the rent on a space so that you can vacate part of your building and do the construction work. So can the GOS funds be used to rent a space to move your collections during a capital move? That is probably eligible because that is not the capital work. I would definitely like to talk to this applicant individually, and anybody, yes, definitely call us. But anybody in this situation, just give us a call. It sounds like it would be acceptable, but I just would want to be clear on our part. And, you know, this does lead to another notion, is that if you are successful with general operating support, there is a contracting process that happens. You're filling out a section when you apply that we did not talk about, and it's something called the work plan, it's the expenditure budget. Those sections are not evaluated, those populate contracts, and those sections are something we have a conversation about in the end. I review all of those so that I make sure that whatever you are including on your contract is something that we can fund. So if somebody includes an item that cannot, I have had applicants put capital elements in that contracting language section, and then I talk to them and we change it to reflect something that is fundable. So there's, I guess what I'm saying is there's another moment where that can be addressed in the grants gateway.
I want to go back to the first question that Kristen answered about multi-year, whether an organization already has multi-year. So everything we've talked about relates to submitting an application for funding for calendar year 2019. If you are on a multi-year and you know that your multi-year is covering you for that calendar year, then all you need to do is register for it on the NYSCA website. You will not need to submit a proposal on Grants Gateway. And I would say the majority of organizations that have been, a good number of our organizations that apply to NYSCA are on multi-year, so they will be safe from having to apply in the Grants Gateway. However, when that multi-year runs out, they'll have to do the whole thing all over again, full proposal and full registration on NYSCA. So definitely, how do you check whether you're on multi-year or not? That's very easy. Also log into the NYSCA website and look at your welcome page, and it will tell you what are your current contracts with us, and it should give you, beginning on the 21st, an opportunity to register those proposals. So it should be pretty clear to you. We don't have to check for you. We'd like for you to be fully empowered to use the website and know ahead of time what you're expected to do. The website is also very useful in telling you what final reports are due. We encourage you to also keep on top of that and write down on a big bulletin board what those deadlines are, because that will help you keep on top of them and be eligible to apply again. Obviously, if you have what we call delinquent final report, you will not be considered for funding.
And I want to reinforce something Fabiana just said, that if you are an organization that has received GOS, but your multi-year contract has concluded, and now for 2019 you need to apply. Sometimes folks will say to me, so I'm reapplying, so I do something different. No, everybody is the same, whether it is your first time or your 10th time. If you need to apply this year for funding for 2019, no one's treated differently. You're all in the same, you're all applying the same way. You're all evaluated the same way. There's no shortcuts if you're someone that's received funding before. That sometimes is confusing, it seems to folks, but I want to make that clear. If you're applying, if you are in the position to apply for 2019, everybody's in the same boat. Same questions, same deadlines, same analysis.
So everybody get on that boat. I think we're good.
We are.
Any questions? Okay.
No, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. This this webinar was recorded. It will be uploaded to our website soon if you want to review any portion of it. Again, this is how you can reach Fabiana or myself. We highly encourage you to feel free to ask us questions before February 21st. We highly encourage you to submit your registration or your application well before the March 28th deadline. Someone always cries on the phone to me. Please don't let that be you on March 28th. I beg of you. I don't want anyone crying this year because it makes me sad. It makes them sad. It's very stressful. Don't put yourself in that position. Pretend March 28th isn't your deadline if that's what you need to do. Really get it in sooner. Thank you so much for listening to us. Have a great day, and we're here for you whenever we can.
Goodbye.
Bye.